there's a lot of stuff that's happened in the last 30 odd years in the city, and really we haven't really talked about it, whether it's been out of fear or whether it's been out of the fact that just no one's been able to articulate it very well. You haven't really had movies made about it. This was like, this was a rich vein of information that no one really had ever tapped. So it started, I guess, really with the death of my father. And as I said, because it was a violent death, because it was a murder, there's an investigation, there were all sorts of issues connected to that. So that's where my kind of interaction with the realities of life, so to speak, which is where the question arose of what is wrong with the system. I was never one of those people who was interested or ever thought of themselves as a writer. I stumbled upon writing when I was somewhat frustrated in my job, and it became a sort of cathartic tool. And then it just, as I said, grew into an alternate career. There were stories that were all, from real life, but they were amazing. I mean, A, they were amazing narratives, and B, it's, literally some of those stories you would never believe were real. When I had taken a sort of break, I'd gone on a degree course, so I'd moved to London for a couple of years. I think it was the point where you turn from being the naive sort of junior officer to kind of finding out that reality is very different, and then that leads to a certain degree of frustration and dismay. Those frustrations led me to kind of start writing, putting things down. Part of it was also that reading some bits of what a lot of people had written, especially when it had to do with things like interactions with the state, whether it's the police or any. The writing felt stilted, and to me it felt as if it was not really scratching the surface, and there were stories and there were sort of nuances in those interactions that no one had quite picked up, and so it kind of became a thing of saying, well, I think I could do better than this in trying to highlight those nuances. And so it just, obviously the material I had at hand was all these stories in the police and about the police, especially about Karachi. And so that was where that kind of got wedded into writing this manuscript, which ultimately became The Prisoner. One of my closest friends and colleagues from the police was Chaudhry Aslam, who was a renowned police officer in Karachi. In fact, the principal character in that book is modeled on his personality, and also professionally, because we worked together for a very long time, and I learned a lot from him. Around the time that Aslam was killed was right around the time when I was launching my first book, The Prisoner. And in fact, I believe, if memory serves correct, that the day that he was killed, I was actually on my way to some sort of book launching event when I got the news. And it was surreal because, of course, it was very sudden, and then you have this thing where you've just written a book which draws heavily upon that person, and that person is no longer there, and obviously then a lot of the talk and sort of the buzz or whatever you call it around the book also turns into, so it kind of becomes, I don't know if life imitating art is the right appropriate phrase for it, or so it was very, very weird. In many ways, I think I'm very glad that I wrote the book when I did, because in a way it served to at least retain some of the stories or the memories that he had, so it kind so now they're there for posterity. What made it more difficult was that at the time I wasn't living here, and so when you're not there and you're kind of on your own, or you're not with a wider group of friends or family, you're just with your immediate family in the cold of a London winter. It was January or February of 2014, which at the best of times is a depressing time. And then kind of having to process this in an environment where the immediate people around you were not aware of the significance of this person, or what had happened back in Karachi. So it was a very trying time. When I launched The Prisoner and subsequently my following books, it was my opportunity after a long period of time to interact in that sense with a lot of young people. I'm not a teacher, so it's not something that I do regularly, but I was able to do it through the books and through sort of book launches and events and things like that. And the impression that I got was that I think for a lot of young people, they related to the books because they felt that it was the stories that were being told in my 3 books were stories that they had lived and been a part of, but no one had really been able to articulate them in a way that was accessible for those young people. So I think there was a great deal of empathy on their side to the stuff that I was writing, and I thought that was interesting because I didn't write the books with any particular target audience in mind. There's a lot of stuff that's happened in the last 30 odd years in the city, and really we haven't really talked about it, whether it's been out of fear or whether it's been out of the fact that just no one's been able to articulate it very well. You haven't really had movies made about it. I mean, you see something like, to give you an example, you see something like Narcos, right, about the Colombian drug lords, and obviously the 80s and 90s were a very difficult time, in many ways very similar period of time for Colombia as the period that we are going through now, for different reasons, but you have a lot of literature in Spanish as well as in English over there, and it's not just written literature, it's also, as I said, movies, documentaries, etc. And I just feel that we've been through this period as citizens of this city for 30 years, like an entire generation, right? And no one's really looked at that. The first 3 books that I've written were very Karachi centric. But I think now the challenge for me, and it's an interesting challenge as a writer, is to move away from that. So to challenge yourself, push yourself a little more, and write about what is not as familiar as what I've written about before. So I just finished a book which has gone off to my publishers, and we've agreed to deal. Hopefully it'll be out next year. And it's about match fixing. In a country like Pakistan, which is cricket crazy, is another one of those, real story gems, because it's something that happened. It's something that we don't really, considering how cricket mad as a country we don't really talk about that much. And if you start drilling down into it, there's just these fascinating human stories that are there. It happens quite a bit that there's something going on and your mind switches on and you say, this is a great scene, and you try and sort of, with a photographic memory, take down any and all impressions that you can. I identify as a police officer because that is my day job, right? That's the job that pays the bills. Writing is something that I love. It's something that I find now is necessary for me to do just to maintain my mental sanity. Empathy is a quality that I feel is necessary in a police officer. If you don't have empathy, you should probably not be doing this job. And it's very hard to maintain that because I think you tend to become very desensitized. You see so much that's wrong. I always try and put myself in the shoes of someone who is the victim, who's sort of come to me asking for help, come to me in my capacity as a police officer. Because of the strenuous nature of the job, we tend to lose that feeling of empathy, and that's probably also why there is culturally, on the flip side of it, the public doesn't particularly empathize with the police either. The management of the criminal justice system. I think you would probably agree with me that a lot of people, if you were to ask people from various segments of society, whether uber rich or people who will hand to mouth, they would say, if in a one-line thing, they would say that there's a lack of provision of justice. That perception has set in, and it's set in very firmly. And I think that's where we need to do a lot of work. And it's not easy because, when you talk about the criminal justice system, it's not just the police. The police is one component of it. It's the courts, it's, prosecution, defense, the justice system as a whole, prisons. Unless you can create a perception in a large or a majority segment of society that actually, this is a fair society, in the sense that if you do something wrong, more likely than not, you will get your just desserts, and if you do something right, vice versa. If you are able to instill that, then I think that is the building block where then a lot of other things that have to do with governance and good citizenship can build upon.